good to see so many people here interested in AI and ready to hear more from our experts on what AI in the economy is doing. As the director of FinTech at the Milken Institute, my mic is off. As the director of FinTech at the Milken Institute, we are focused on financial inclusion, access to capital. They're going to bring me a mic. You hear me? OK, I feel like I'm going in and out. We're focused on access to capital and financial inclusion. We're also focused on looking at innovative technology and how it's impacting our economy. They're going to grab me a mic. The title of this session, The Rising AI Economy, 25 years ago, it could have been titled The Rising of the Internet Economy. Thank you. 15 years ago, it could have been The Rising of the Mobile Economy. And 5 years ago, it could have been The Rising of the Crypto Economy, but we'll see how that goes. So at each rise, technology applications changed our behavior, changed how we live, work, and do business. Now, AI has been around for decades, as we all know, but it has a new attention for all of us because it is now in the hands of the masses. It's not perfect, but it's showing potential in many sectors, including healthcare, finance, and education. So our speakers are going to take us on a master class of AI. They are experts in investing, technology, and innovation. And the goal really is to leave everyone with tangible and usable information as you navigate the AI hype cycle. So I want to start with you, Sachin. Sachin, you are the lead builder of AI. You are harnessing artificial intelligence to empower enterprises and entrepreneurs to build and develop at scale. There is a lot of white noise right now, and it feels like we are on the throes of another hype cycle. I'm excited to have you, a wizard on stage, to demystify the hype. And can you just walk us through the hype versus the reality, because you're right at the center of this work?
I think that's it feels like it's the theme of today, because in so many of the different discussions where it's becoming a central point of exactly where we are. You know, the moment we're in now reminds me a lot of the time when, and I sort of said this to a few folks, when AOL launched the disk and everyone thought the internet was born, but actually the internet had been here for decades before. But it was that moment when it was just so different. It also reminds me of the moment, I'm not sure many of you have used RailPlayer. I just remember using it, almost 2 decades ago, but it was the promise of video streaming, and you would press play and it takes 10 minutes, and then you'd see a 30-second clip. But the promise was you'll be able to watch high-definition videos online. And so when we think about where we are in that AI cycle, it almost feels like we're in the dial-up world. And broadband is yet still to come. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have a dial-up modem at home. I don't use RailPlayer anymore. And that's a real testament to what I think we're going to see as we see this evolve. We're still very early even in our thinking around use cases. Right? A lot of how to explain what AI can do is, remember, it's artificial intelligence. Therefore, it is trying at some point to mimic human intelligence. And there's an argument to say at some point it might become better than human intelligence. But fundamentally, the human mind thinks in 3 ways. If you all remember a video of you, like a visual of you swimming as a kid, you see that video? Well, you're not generating that. You're retrieving it. And that's a knowledge graph. And then if I said to the audience, could you help me complete my sentence? What do you think I'm going to, and the word you're probably thinking about is say or do. But there's a million words I could have said. But say or do, well, that's inference or neural networks. And then, we have this great panel, and it's a great format, and maybe we want to generate a poem about it with known entities. And there we're generating with, small, well-known entities. But you see, AI is so much broader. And so the last thing I sort of shaped to you is, we think it's an evolution of technology that happened in November 22. My argument, it's an evolution of design. You have the most complicated piece of software on the planet, and it looks like WhatsApp. That's the user interface. So I don't know about you, but I talk to my mom on WhatsApp. and it's pretty easy. And she talks to me on WhatsApp, and it's really easy for her. And so now suddenly you have a complex technology sitting in a channel reserved for humans. It's slow, and because it's slow, you trust it more. And then we changed all the vernacular. We stopped using acronyms. We started to say hallucinations, but it's not human. It's not really hallucinating. And that's really what's got people quite perked up in the good or the bad format. So I think it's really exciting, but everything we know will all change in the next 12 to 24 months.
Awesome. X, I want to bring you into this because I want to start with those who have been kind of inside, under the hood with AI. X, you are AI insider. You've deployed AI across the economy from big tech to government. You're an engineer. You've gotten under the hood and analyzed products, governance, and ethical issues. Can you give us some positives and negatives on the potential of the impact of AI on our economy?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, it's important that in all of the fear-mongering that's going on, that we do recognize that AI really does have the potential to catapult our society and us as individuals and collectively into a much better position. An example of this is around the world today, there are almost 800 million adults who cannot read. Tools like Read Along or Microsoft's Reading Coach are AI-based tools that you can access completely free from the web. You can access them from your phone, and you can read out loud to them, and they coach you in real time. So now whether or not you had access to the right schools, you had access to the right tutors, you're able to build yourself up. And when we look at the US, who is undergoing a literary crisis, where last year, across all racial groups, I believe the number was less than 50% of all students across all racial groups were reading at their grade level in the 4th grade. And so now instead of having to have lucked up and lived in the right neighborhood or had a parent who could afford tutoring, you can access these tools and gain literacy yourself. Another example of AI helping the world is in medicine. We've seen it. We see it with all of the news about how these computer vision systems, which is when you teach AI how to see, right? With these computer vision systems that are able to look at diagnostic images and detect diseases or detect conditions so much better than doctors are, which to me makes me happy, because if my doctor's looking at my x-ray and they just happen to be tired, I don't want them to miss if there's something seriously wrong. But at the same time that AI can help us remove some of the barriers to our collective success, it also introduces ways to automate our collective progress away. An example of this in the United States, and these are the questions I dealt with a lot when I was at Google. An example of this in the United States is in child protective services. So in the US, there's an algorithm that's been deployed that is working on trying to determine whether or not a child is at risk of being harmed and deciding whether or not to separate them from their parent. Well, when this algorithm was tested in the state of Illinois from 2016 to 2017, it basically would take in the case report and then assign a score from 0 to 100. 100 means the child is like 100% going to die, 80, 90, they're seriously in danger. So Illinois tested this for a year, and during that year, it flagged about 360 children as 100% going to die. None of them were actually in danger. The system ended up missing children who were actually in danger, and all of the children that it flagged at that higher mark happened to be black and brown. So Illinois said, hey, this system doesn't work. We don't want to use AI for this. We'd rather use humans, and they got rid of it. But dozens of states in the US still use it to this day. When you look at the implications of our favorite tools, large language models, ChatGPT, Bard, et cetera, all of those tools are not intelligent systems. They're basically large parrots, where they're taking your prompt, converting that into a token. You heard the word token, that's what it means. They're converting it into math, and they're mathematically predicting what word should come next. So they're playing a large guessing game. These systems have been shown to be biased against people who don't speak English. There's recent research when ChatGPT was used in clinical settings that it demonstrated racial bias, it demonstrated gender bias, and these are not off-the-cuff studies. We're talking about things published in Nature, things published in Scientific American. And despite that, Moderna just announced that they're introducing 750 custom GPTs across all of their medical business, including custom GPTs that are going to be used to determine what dosage is needed inside of clinical trials. And so while we have these tools that have great potential to propel us forward, without proper boundaries around them, without proper requirements around them for testing, for safety, for fairness, we stand to collectively be the guinea pigs of them. And that can set us back in progress. So what it actually turns into, whether it's a superhero or a supervillain, is up to us collectively to decide through regulation, through use cases in our own businesses and companies. And these are questions that in Malo Santo, my AI consultancy now, I work with clients like L'Oreal, Mozilla, and LG to figure out every day.
Good, good. So we have some insiders information. Sachin, you want to jump in on some of this?
Yes, so I think it's a really important point that you've brought up, and to me, there's three frames of this. So the one of them is if we think about how large language models work, it's about frequency. If something has a high enough frequency, it's likely to be considered the truth. So let's imagine a use case. It's my favorite example. So I'm a Brit, and imagine I'm trying to teach an 11-year-old American independence. So we teach an 11-year-old in New York, and we teach an 11-year-old in London. It's the same language model. Now, we know that sovereignty is a function of history, is a function of culture. Culture is a function of history. But if suddenly you make history homogeneous, you wipe out culture, and you actually question sovereignty. And so that's one whole paradigm. I think you have a second paradigm, which is currently, we're using a sports car to do a Formula One race, which is this analogy of the GPU versus inference versus CPU. So, and why is that a problem? Well, today, the amount of H100 NVIDIA chips in circulation is the power consumption of Sri Lanka. At that rate, we will have the power consumption of the whole of Europe in the next sort of 16 to 18 months, and potentially the whole power consumption of the world if we don't change how these things are done. And so that starts to tell you that we're going very deep, very fast, but into a technology that's highly inefficient. And it's, to your point, it's a parrot. It's approximating, it can't reason. And then the very last thing I'd say to you is, the concern here, especially as you think about what's happening in open source, is that these models can now run on a phone, at least the ones that have been built on open source that are trying to be built on the edge, which means sort of the genie's out of the box. And anyone can now create things that look remarkably real and synthetic, and you won't be able to tell until the damage is far too widespread.
So there's billions of dollars that's chasing AI right now, and there's billions sitting on the sidelines. I want to get the investors on the panel involved in this conversation about how you are looking at AI as an investment and what investors should be aware of. I want to start with you, Seth. You lead infrastructure, software, and cybersecurity strategy for Thoma Brava. Where are you seeing AI unlock new value? And as an investor, what are you weary of or concerned about?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. So we're in the business of the enterprise software business. Of owning companies and working with management teams to build great businesses across all sorts of different sectors, including infrastructure and cyber, and I spend most of my time in those areas. And these are businesses that have anywhere from 20 million of revenue today up to 2 billion. So it's a wide gamut of companies. They're operating in all geographies around the world and serving customers and industries really everywhere, companies of all sizes and in all geographies. When we're spending billions on R&D, right, and machine learning, as you mentioned before, and AI is not something that's new. We've been there, and this is the next the next frame of it. What we're seeing today is very real time, some incredible use cases that are being delivered to our company's customers, and we're seeing it everywhere. And despite the fact that Gen AI really, as we talk about it as a use case, is really 12 months old. The speed in which our companies have been able to deliver real value to the market is actually pretty exceptional. And it might be something like a budgeting and planning tool that a large enterprise is using where an executive can interact with it in a way that it wasn't able to before. In the world of cyber, where I spend a lot of my time, as we've been talking about, the threat vector today is so massive and different. The deepfake technology that exists, that is incredibly well funded, is so much more advanced than it was just a year ago. And on the flip side of that, our cyber companies, with all of the information that they have and all the data and all the knowledge that's going into their LLMs, is able to now detect much quicker, respond much faster, provide security analysts in much more real time the ability to defend these very large enterprises. At the same time, we are seeing this as an enabler of talent, similar to what we see as a democratization of areas like healthcare and education, hopefully over time. This is an enabler of global talent around the world. And the talent that resides inside our companies has been able to use this new tool to just become a lot more efficient. So we do see the world being able to do a lot more with a lot less over time. And we view that as a positive. We're incredibly optimistic about where we're at. On the flip side, and this is of course all very new, the types of issues that our companies and their customers are having to deal with, it's all new. So even today, you get into the contract phase, with a Fortune 1000 company, and we're now talking about issues around Gen AI and who owns the data, and will the data be used in your company's LLM? That is all brand new, and people are still trying to figure that out real time. But these types of discussions, the governance, some of the regulations coming out of Europe, that is all really important, but it is still very, very, very early. As an investor, we're not sitting, we don't fund startups. Our focus on innovation is organic and residing inside these incredible industry leaders that are innovative in their own respective rights. And this technology has allowed them to become even more innovative. So we're excited. We see a lot of incredible potential in vertical markets, in horizontal markets. Cyber is an incredibly exciting and also scary place to be at the moment. But fundamentally, this is a technology shift that we think ultimately just delivers a ton of value to the customers of our companies and makes them a lot more relevant and important over time.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Martine, I'd like to get your unique investment perspective to this conversation. Temasek has been an early investor in Web3, quantum computing, and AI. So how does AI fit into your investment thesis? And can you also talk about how the unlocking opportunities that AI provides and some of your concerns?
Happy to, Nicole, and thanks for having me. I'm glad Seth went first because as an investor, we've done early stage investing in certain areas, but we have a large portfolio, including large companies, global companies, much more mature companies. I think there are two questions that we're asking ourselves as investors. The first one is actually focused on the portfolio. AI is going to touch every single business. It's actually going to touch every single individual, right? Driving efficiency is what we're looking for. And supercharging talent, supercharging humans is really what we're talking about. So the first question is every business over the next 10, 20 years will have an opportunity to use AI in some form or another to drive efficiency. Robotics is part of AI as well, right? So we need to think holistically. So part of what we're doing is starting with our portfolio and evaluating where are the opportunities, which company is using AI today well, where should we lean in more, who is lagging purely as a user of AI. And this is driving margin expansion, cost reduction, human talent expansion effectively. So that's one question. Now, the other question is how to invest in AI, and that's difficult, right? There's a question of innovation versus incumbency. There's a question of time frames, how quickly do things happen, et cetera. What we've started doing as an organization is actually separate a little bit the thinking and the work streams between AI native thinking, i.e. the new businesses, the disruptors, the ones that are born in the age of AI. And you can choose when you want to say that the age of AI started. You could even pick November 22 if you want. Doesn't matter. Who are the native AI businesses? And then there is the AI wave riders, as we talk about them. Now, AI wave riders are not the businesses that are using AI to drive costs or drive margin. That's everyone. AI wave riders are the ones whose revenues are going to be determined by AI, whose moat is going to be determined by AI. And we're asking ourselves this, yes, in software. Software, this is why I'm glad Seth went first, right? Software is ultimately going to be the enabler. The way most of us are going to use AI as individuals is enabled by software, whether it's enterprise software, consumer software, right? But software businesses either are going to get disrupted or they have the opportunity to develop new products on the AI side. But this is going to be true across every sector of the economy. To what was saying earlier. Someday, we're going to have an AI doctor. What does that look like? Someday, we're going to have an AI financial advisor. What does that look like? Someday, we're going to have individual teachers teaching us. What is that going to look like, right? So this is the way we're trying to think about the world. We have this AI native, AI wave rider construct, and it's a dialogue between the two. At some point in the future, this becomes one conversation. In the meantime, we find it helpful to separate that a little bit because it's hard to talk about what the disruptors are doing and what Microsoft, NVIDIA, and then the long list of strong incumbents are doing.
Thanks, Martine. I want to just get to Sachin really quick because you've successfully raised hundreds of millions of dollars and in terms of as an AI company. And so can you just share some of the concerns or how did you make investors comfortable investing in your company?
Look, I think that's a great question. And let me start by saying in more than not cases, we did not make them comfortable. And so we started well before the 2022 wave. We started the company in 2016. And it was for, our thesis was 2 or 3 things. We said, everyone in the world is going to build software. Most people don't know how to build it. And they're all building the same stuff. And we define the same stuff as it's the same Lego blocks that make up most applications. And ultimately, you can use AI to build any application. So what do we learn as the investor receipt? Well, we've invested in a bunch of SaaS companies. And if this works, all our SaaS portfolio gets attacked. Because we know, for example, we get customers that come to us from a Salesforce or a Zendesk. They were spending $1 million a year. They come to Builder, and they spend $200,000. They ain't going back to the SaaS world. I think the second thing was it's about timing, right? Being in Europe was really tough because you had an element of conservatism that, but it was either the Americans will figure it out, and then we will go sort of figure out how to do a play on the back of that. But there wasn't a lot of frontier work development. And I think the third that was, for me, was really interesting was, and we've seen this more now, is having revenue was a real problem. So this seemed like the most counterintuitive thing, and I've heard it more in the last week than I've heard it ever before, but actually having sizable revenue was a real problem because the dream of underwriting wasn't that this is going to make $10 billion. It was like, oh, well, this has grown 8x in 3 years, but they can't keep growing at 8x in 3 years for the next 3 years. And so you had companies that, the wave riders to a certain extent, they've built wrappers around an LLM, and they're raising billion-dollar valuations with no revenue, with a promise that they're going to charge $100,000 per developer. On the other hand, you've got companies that have got hundreds of millions of revenue that have demonstrated how AI over time systematically implemented, and not just us, but others. And they're getting effectively nickel and dimed around, well, hang on a second, this might happen, or you know what? I mean, I laugh because I had this Amazon Q email has now come to me 1,000 times in the last week, which is Amazon just launched Q. And I said, great. So I've been saying this since 2016. Amazon launches Q, and now suddenly you believe it 8 years later. And so I think and so where does it unpack is AI, unfortunately, has so much information asymmetry that the people that are potentially writing the check, the folks that can write the really large checks, are so far removed from what the potential of possible, not possible, hoax and real, that it's creating a hype, which is it's making it hard for folks that are actually also doing something.
Well, talk about doing something. I want to get less involved because as a technologist and an early adopter, you are always at the cutting edge. Whether it's finance, art, entertainment, you have the courage and grit to go out here and find use cases that are shaping our economy. What are you excited about with AI's adoption and use cases?
I think that comes from my general boredom usually, and my need to be distracted at all times. We heard a lot of interesting things. We hear about the important applications of AI, medicine, cybersecurity, investment verticals. Sadly, I'm about to bring this panel down to virtual girlfriends and digital doubles. That's a half joke. If you take a look at the virtual girlfriend economy that's emerging out of the App Store, this is just the realization of movies like Her. And there is a technology that exists in that, where you can build relationships with technology because of the prompts and how they're set up. And if you think that's funny, if you look at some of the gamers in Asia, they actually pay money to play games with AI doubles in Asia. And that's also now another big kind of emerging market. I had written a piece on musicians and copyrights. And there's this concept that as musicians age, they don't necessarily have the same prolific writing talents. And now they could actually be able to write with themselves, but the AI version of themselves. So these are kind of the things that I think about and fascinate me. And one of the things we did recently is we started motion capturing influencers. And we put AI into them and put them into games. So we could create a new environment in those video games where you had a deeper engagement, deeper relationship with those digital doubles. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the point of digital doubles is ultimately going to be monetization in different verticals. And that's going to lead to a whole bunch of different moral quandaries down the road. But I think we're just at the beginning of all of this.
Thanks, Les. We're going to talk more about some of the other use cases that are out there, but I want to dig into a conversation around the most valuable assets in an economy are human capital, social capital. I want to dig into the concerns around that people have about replacement of themselves or displacement of themselves. Want to tackle a conversation here on workplace readiness or upskilling, reskilling. What do we need to do to get everyone kind of involved in this process? So I'm happy to kick it over to maybe X if you want to talk a little bit about workforce, and then happy for Sachin to jump in and others.
100%. So there was a statistic that came out in 2014 that said at that time, everyone who was in the 4th grade, in the next 10, by the time they were 18, that 80% of the jobs that were there when they were in 4th grade wouldn't be around anymore. And I don't think they predicted AI would move as fast as it has, but that statistic is showing to be more and more true every day. And I think that there are 2 elements that we need to remember about this technological transition. The first is that when any new market is created, new opportunities are created within that market. So take the invention of the digital camera, for example. When the digital camera was first invented, all of the film photographers said, that's not real photography. That's not the same thing. All of the people who worked in dark rooms developing the actual film, who actually used to manually cut film for editing, when Photoshop came out, were like, it's going to take my job. And it actually did. They were right. There was a reality that old ways of doing tasks were antiquated and it needed to be replaced. But at the same time, the invention of the digital camera is the reason why most of us in this room probably know who Mr. Beast is. Because it gave us new platforms to share our content. It created new economies and new opportunities within that. It's why we have YouTube. It's why we're all arguing about whether or not we should ban TikTok. It's even why people are able to live stream right now, because it made that more accessible. And so as these technologies come in and potentially shift or replace jobs that are no longer needed and function, we have to ask ourselves what new markets will be created. So as we're worried about things like the film industry, where there's a lot of concern around what happens with generative AI replacing storytellers, quite honestly, I'm excited to see a feature film that was created entirely by a kid in Ghana in his room who was just bored and made the next Star Wars. It allows us to create more market opportunities. The second piece is around reskilling. Right now, we are in the wild, wild west of AI. Companies are pushing forward at all costs. They are in a race to get to artificial general intelligence, which is what Sachin mentioned earlier, when AI is as smart as us or has surpassed our intelligence. And in that, they are not thinking about the people that they are displacing. And the governments and the infrastructure are not prepared to reskill folks because those new markets haven't been created. So I think that there's a responsibility collectively to move fast enough to move forward. What I've seen in a lot of companies who are adopting AI at this rapid pace that maybe aren't a Google or Microsoft like my former employers is that they rush to implement the technologies without understanding its benefits and where it can be strong and where it can be weak. So for example, turning on ChatGPT into the business. There are some very famous cases. Air Canada was just sued because its ChatGPT-based customer service bot was hallucinating, it was making things up, about its bereavement policy. They ended up being sued. It was like $250, but they took it all the way to court, and the court found that they were liable for whatever that chatbot generated. The city of New York has a similar issue where they released a chatbot that business owners could go talk to, and it could tell them about laws, and it started telling people to break the law. And the mayor of New York said, I'm not taking that down because you know this new technology rolls out. It's got to get better over time. And so if you're moving so fast that you are using these tools outside of the boundaries of what they're capable of or without knowledge of those boundaries, you put your business at risk. And displacing people to do that is not the smartest way. So what I always recommend, and tip for everyone in this room, is first, start with a clear use case. Then pick a small sample of how to solve that use case. So don't go replace your entire marketing department. Maybe start with just social media captions on one platform for 1 week, or maybe a month. And then, as you deploy that technology, get feedback, not just from how the AI performs, get feedback from the humans who are responsible for those systems so you understand what's needed to seamlessly integrate it and then scale out from there. You want to move fast, but you only want to move fast enough to move forward.
Sachin and Les, I'm going to get you in on this conversation.
Yeah, I just had a quick question because you just mentioned AGI. So the Department of Homeland Security right now has established almost a defense to do, figure out the guidelines for AI. You can say that Elon Musk, who was just here, XAI, is kind of focused on some of the same things. How far are we from superintelligence?
So I get this question a lot, and I think the challenge is that just like offline from these systems, we don't have a universally agreed upon definition of intelligence. There are 7 different common definitions of what AGI is, and it's a moving goalpost. So before, AGI used to be defined as able to cognitively reason like a human, have emotion, have the ability to navigate the world like a human. Well, OpenAI's definition is that it should be able to do most of the jobs that humans do as good as humans, which isn't the same as being intelligent, in my opinion, and being able to reason and have feeling. And so how quick we get there depends on whose definition you're using. Yeah. And a lot of the definitions have shifted, I think, because a lot of these folks, as we're in this AGI race, want to be the ones in the history book to say that they did it first. On another level, I think there's a larger question with AGI, which is we still don't fully understand how the human brain works. Correct. We're still discovering how the olfactory system works, which is our smell system. We're still discovering things about how our body stores memory or how different parts of the brain is connected to each other. So how can we have something that is as intelligent as humans if we don't truly understand the biological nature of how human intelligence works? That's my personal take, but that's also why Mark Zuckerberg just dropped $500 million on a research center at Harvard to try to accelerate understanding of human brain through AI. So it depends on who's...
But isn't it going to be too late? I mean, the Turing test used to be one of the things we used as an evaluation of, human intelligence, but superintelligence is past AGI. And I think it's pretty easy to understand if, you don't have the capacity to understand. And then you have the moral quandary of superintelligence where decisions will be made that we cannot control, and won't it be too late at a certain point?
And what's scary about that, so the Department of Defense in the United States just did a test with ChatGPT for wargaming. I'm a military veteran, so I was reading all the nerdy papers. So wargaming is basically when a bunch of generals get together and they simulate a war situation. So what would happen if China dropped a nuclear bomb, and they simulate how they would respond to it. So they used ChatGPT for wargaming, and at every single step of the turn, ChatGPT kept concluding drop a nuclear bomb. There was no other option. There was no let's work it out, let's be peaceful, negotiable. And to Satya's point, they're parroting what they've seen frequently. And so I think, again, that comes back to what I mentioned earlier, is that do we want these technologies being developed in these ways without boundaries, without guardrails, without ensuring that, as they're parroting the world, that the world is actually represented inside of the data sets that are used to train them, as they're being used to affect our lives right here and right now, outside of just, hey Siri going off when I don't want her to. We have to collectively decide what that looks like, and that's where regulation comes in. And the EU has done a fantastic job of making sure that humans are protected inside of their AI regulation, and I hope, and am working in our policy lab at UC Berkeley to make sure that we are able to make that happen as well. But again, I don't think it's something that we should wait for and see what happens. I think that we have an active role to play in shaping that, just like the folks who came before us had an active role in shaping that Nokia cell phone whose battery I wish I still had, so that we could have these iPhones now. And so personally, I think all of us have a collective responsibility to shape what happens next and not leave it up to the people that we believe are smart enough to get it.
Well, and I think there's an important point around that, right? Because if you imagine sort of the war game question, one of the things that we see a lot is, so with large language models, the context window is really important. And then context window is sort of defined as Like, how wide is your question versus how controlled is the question? And so the bigger the box, the more error you will generate. Right? The bigger the box, the more you are asking the system to approximate an answer. Because remember, these things can't reason. And we use the word intelligence. Intelligence implies reasoning. They're approximating reasoning through enough data to say it kind of feels like this would be the reasonable answer, which is not the reasoned answer as such. And so what you're really starting to see, and it shows sort of the state of the technology, is people are now saying, hang on a second, I actually don't want to generate the entire context window. I'm going to generate smaller boxes. They're a little bit more controlled. But I know that because they're so controlled and they're so small, like even if it generates something odd there, it's okay. It's like this little box, and I can have lots of them, and I can connect them together. But I think, but sort of to pivot to the other side of the conversation, and sort of talking about, where that change is coming. From my opinion, the way AI is today, and where it will probably be at least for the next 12 to 24 months, but you never know, it's the cape you're putting on humans to make them superhumans. And so what do I mean by that? So I think the first thing, let's start with the negative. A good salesperson is a skill. And we talked about this last night, if some of you were in the session, but a good salesperson is a skill. Today, a person has that skill for life. It's how they make more money than the average salesperson. But actually, the question is, whose skill is that? If you came out of school and you joined a company and you spent 10 years there and you became the best salesperson, does that skill belong to the company or does it belong to the individual? And then what happens is, actually, we could take a language model, a knowledge graph, and we could say, well, actually, here are the 60 attributes of a good salesperson. See how they write emails, see how they close deals, see how they have the conversation, see how they change their voice. And now you could make the average salespeople good salespeople. We've seen this with Copilot with developers, right? You've taken not so good developers and you made them semi-good. And so now you have this issue, right? You have this good salesperson who can no longer be a good salesperson because he's competing with the rest of his peer group. So that goes back to, well, what does education mean? Like, what am I going to teach my 7-year-old? Because we're teaching kids to learn skills that are going to be their skills for life. Well, actually, they're not their skills for life. The only skill that's really valid is that you can keep learning a new skill. And so that goes into the heart of how we think about education. STEM is dead, yet we keep teaching our kids STEM. I'd eat my shoes if children are writing code in 10 years. Yet we're telling kids, you must write code, you must do programming. There's kids that can code, there's girls that can code, there's boys that can code. It's pointless. Why is anyone coding? And so it starts to give you this sense of just how much lag there is. And we're so out of sync. On one hand, we'll say AG. On the other hand, we're teaching kids to write code. And this problem magnifies when you start to think about the things that we don't understand. So, we think about large language models as it can write poetry, it can do English, it can do a painting, it can do all of that. Well, actually, a large language model can read DNA. Here's the problem. We can't read DNA. So we have no concept of if it's right or wrong. And that actually is pretty near-term future because we're no longer reasoning the way we reason. It's trying to find patterns. And actually, that's the right thing to be used for. But it's definitely frightening because we have no idea what it could do with it.
Martine, I know you want to jump in here.
Yeah, just listening to the back and forth, one of the questions we think about is who has the responsibility? We do talk about responsible AI, et cetera, and I like what you said. It's everyone, right? I'll take us 2 steps back into ancient history of AI. I don't know who's been in San Francisco seeing all the Waymo cars driving around, right? This is all before Gen AI. I think the business is 15 years old or whatever. It's interesting to think about what Waymo is. Today, it's a commercial service. Next time you're in San Francisco, try it out. I commute to work using Waymo. The way Waymo thinks is they have created a driver, and they're taking the responsibility of the driver. Safety is at the core of what they do, and that's how they approach it. Just like each of us, when we're behind the wheel driving, take the responsibility of a driver, right? Now, it's been 15 years. It feels slow. It feels like forever. We all know that autonomous vehicles should be here. And why is it taking so long? Because of that responsibility, right? Now, big and small, whatever anyone is doing, whether it's an existing company that's implementing AI as part of the solution, whether it's a new business, what's the responsibility you're taking on? To the point of selling solutions, some of what you're doing, right? Are you enabling a salesperson to do better, or are you effectively the salesperson for a business? If you have a business where you're replacing the salesperson and you're the salesperson, well, you got to make sure that the product actually is selling and making the right promises. Because if you have an individual whom you employ, that individual is selling something that they can't or making promises that aren't fulfilled, you're going to terminate that employee, right? It's that who has the responsibility, who is taking the accountability for that. We have to figure it out, and it's an iterative process, right? But as we think about responsible AI, it's one of the key questions that we ask, not what does responsible AI means, but who has the responsibility.
On responsible AI, I'd love to turn to you, Seth, on governance, how you are approaching governance with your companies, with your portfolio, and your strategies.
Yeah, it's it's evolving real time, and you know, we're doing it at the Thoma Bravo fund level. So, for example, we spend a lot of time bringing our portfolio together, which is, you know, at this point, a large collection of companies, to talk about best practices and you know, really work together to create policy that we then share to make sure that there's you know, effective collaboration. And that is, you know, that's something that you know, everybody wants more of. So it's a discussion at every board meeting that we have. I think right now nobody has answers, but we do feel incredibly responsible to make sure that as we sort of embark on this, you know, next phase of AI, that we're doing it responsibly and properly. And I will say that the good news is that executives want to get this right. You know, we are at a time now where you can put some good policy in place at the company level in the private sector to make sure that you know, data privacy is in the right place. In some cases, of course, there's country regulation. The EU's put out some, you know, solutions that they've been early and advanced. They have, you know, very strong data privacy rules around GDPR that many people may know about, and that all interplays together as you think about how information is being used in these, you know, in these LLMs that all of our companies are building to deliver more value to their customers. We also have companies like, for example, in our portfolio, we have a big data and analytics company called Click. They've brought together their largest customers to form, in their case, really an AI, you know, best-in-class practices group, so that they're interacting, trying to figure out where the, you know, you know, the biggest pain points might be in putting policy in place with their customers as well. So it ultimately will be a private sector, public sector partnership in our view, but we're taking the perspective that we need to be out ahead of it. Everybody is very focused on it, wants to get it right. It's a important discussion, although it's still very early stages.
Well, I have some great questions that have already come in from you all, and feel free to add them to the QR code that pops up. But I have two questions, and I can combine them. They're both on regulation. The first is, can we trust regulators' governments when they have failed so miserably in regulating social media? And then the second regulation question that came through is, while regulation in AI makes sense, there's something that the Western nations may embrace. However, if our enemies are training their AIs with no limitation, using IP, hacked data, PII, are we not at a disadvantage? Isn't it a fool's errand to allow enemies to build AIs without restriction, but restraining ourselves? So, you know, if someone wants to jump in on kind of what regulators should be doing, thinking about when it comes to AI. I know there's a lot of early work being done, but the question is it the work that needs to be done and in the right way? So I'd love to get maybe someone
I'm kind of terrified by it, just because, you know, the two businesses I'm in, digital currency and AI, seem to be two hot points with the SEC these days. So I'm not really entirely sure that I mean, just from the cryptocurrency side anyway, you know, the regulators have really struggled to figure out what the guidelines should be. And it's, you know, as someone that wants those guidelines, I think I'm even more terrified on the AI side. Because I think they're just figuring it all out right now. So yeah, I mean, the other thing I was just thinking is, you know, Microsoft had a hack, to the other point, in China recently. And, you know, what does that lead to when that's our biggest and brightest? So.
Well, but I think you've seen the hack in places where I saw, it was a Linux kernel. so about a year and a half ago, it was a sort of someone from the, I guess, the spy services within China had dropped in a small worm into the Linux kernel, like closely made their way, got to the top of the distribution, pushed it in, and it was just found magically by chance by someone. And so I don't think it's limited to AI. I think
Yeah.
I think the point is somewhat actually much bigger. It's it's like an iceberg. So we're talking about regulating AI, but that's the bit above the iceberg. But actually, much of the iceberg's below. And so what is below? Well, content and social media, because they're one and the same. And then actually cloud. Now, we've got a whole new world around the edge and what happens with open source and how that comes in. But if we keep that to one side, I think the issues we're facing today are issues related to an absolute lack of governance that we put into place for cloud, for social media, for content. And we're basically now saying AI is the problem. But for example, if we had created structures underneath that, you created control around cloud, you created control around what could be running and how it could be verified and how it could be authenticated, you'd be able to control content. And I say control not in the, you want to sort of avoid free speech, but in the sense of at least you can make sure malicious content is somebody's responsibility. And so this is a stacked problem. And then the very last thing I'd say to you is that you have two problems in regulation today when it comes to artificial intelligence. One is just the rate at which the technology is changing is far faster than the rate at which regulators can even spell what the technology is going to do. And so you have an information asymmetry, which is unlike any other industry. In the prison service, the CEOs, the governors, the policymakers, and the researchers are all pretty much in sync. No one is in sync here. I think if you got all 5 of us together on 4 points, we would probably not be in sync. And so it's very hard to then start to put hard constraints around it. And the last thing I leave you with is what I've seen, especially in developed markets, is we're very quick to regulate the thing we understand. So I was in this session sort of earlier in the week, and everybody was quick to regulate power and transformers. And I was scratching my head because I was like, I must have sat in these discussions across the world. It's the first time I've seen someone trying to regulate power and transformers when we're having a conversation about AI. Because that is such a short-lived view of what the problem is that, it's like you're looking at the one piece of green grass and like you've got dead forest all the way around.
You actually, just one last point there. That's amazing because the innovation moves so fast, the regulators can't keep up. And in many cases, the regulators are relying upon aides who are younger who actually do understand the technology, but the people that govern don't. So how do you solve for that problem?
Well, I think in this situation, it's even the aides, the technology is so specialist that there are about 1,000 experts in AI in the world. Right? That's actually the number. Maybe if you pushed it, it's like 2,500. So you're not going to find those in your aides. And so the second part of this problem is it's not like a STEM problem, it's a polymath problem. If AI is truly going to be what we think it's going to be, you need musicians in the room, you need artists in the room, you need literature, architecture. They're all missing from the entire AI regulation right now. And so what you're doing is you're having a regulator, a scientist, and maybe a researcher or a big company CEO who has an agenda. We all have agendas. Who has an agenda, sitting and defining policy that fundamentally could change human fabric. And you don't have anyone in the room that actually is coming from a diverse background, is coming from a non-technical background, is coming from music and arts. That's a huge issue.
X, jump in.
Yeah, so on the regulation piece, I dealt with this both internally when I was at Google, helping Google prepare for regulation, and then even now in my consultancy, I've worked with one of the agencies that's responsible for writing some of these regulations. And the first thing that I'll say is no. The regulators are not, at least US regulators, are not prepared to regulate this. We all saw the TikTok hearings where the guy was like, but does it use my Wi-Fi? Right? And so the challenge with that is around where the talent goes in industry. When you have people graduating from places like Stanford, like Harvard, who are building the cutting edge fabric of AI models, they are not going to go take a $60,000, $70,000 a year job at the government when they can take a $600,000 or $700,000 job with Google or Amazon or Microsoft, right? So there's a need to kind of bridge that gap in awareness. Now, also we have to think a little bit more realistically about the framework that regulators operate under. When you have a congressman or a senator, right, they're responsible for all the laws in the US, not just AI or tech. So it's very common and has been common practice for them to go to these tech companies or to, if they're trying to regulate big pharma, they'll go to Pfizer and say, hey, can you teach me about the drug approval process? Or they'll go to Google and take the course that I helped write called ML for Policy Leaders. Hey, can you tell me what's going on with AI? And it's very common for them to have an agenda in that process. However, to think that all regulators can't do it well is false, because the EU's AI Act is a perfect example of a smart regulation that's scaled based on the potential harm of the product. AI does not need to be like all AI has to be regulated the same, right? Like if an AI recommends the wrong dosage for my mom's cancer treatment, that has a very different impact than Amazon recommending a book that I don't want to buy, right? So I think that the regulation has to be smart based on the potential risk and harm. The second piece of that is that to answer the question about our enemies and China, right? The US has 6 declared adversaries. China's up there, Cuba's up there, North Korea's up there, et cetera. I think one we have to ask ourselves, I'm a military veteran. I spent 2 years in Afghanistan with special operations. We have to ask ourselves, what value system are we aligning to? When you look at the way that AI is being deployed in China as a country, it matches their value system, right? Like the ease of where everything is streamlined in one app, where if you cross the street when you're not supposed to, it'll like use facial recognition, give you a ticket automatically, and take it right out of your bank. We don't move with those same values. So the fact that they're training their AI to match their values and don't have those boundaries is distinctly what makes our cultures different. It's not necessarily something we need to compete with or catch up with. At the same time, those AI technologies that they're developing in terms of weapons, please believe the US has them too. Have you ever heard of a company called Palantir? Trust that they have the whole internet inside of them, and they work with the military very closely to do basically the same thing that we're arguing that TikTok does. And so we have to look at what is the point of developing AI? Is it to say that we're better than China, or is it to build it in alignment with our values as a society, the Constitution, our civil and constitutional rights that we've stood on and went around the world trying to spread for hundreds of years, right? Like, are we going to stand true to that? Or are we going to try to now become a different society with a different set of values because of fear of what a newspaper saying they have AI that's better than us, right? And so I think that there's a balance that needs to happen between that conversation, is us looking at the moral fabric that we have and asking, why are we even thinking about competing with them in those ways?
So the theme of our conference is shaping a shared future, and I want for our last question for everyone to talk about their contribution to the shaping the shared future of AI, what you think should be included in this future of AI. Elon Musk yesterday talked about, he wants AI to be truth-seeking, he wants it to never lie. So that's on the table. So if we can add some other diverse voices to what we think AI should be and how it should be designed and maybe deployed in applications. I'd love to get a sense of, if we have this diverse panel here with different perspectives and vantage points on the area. Maybe I'll start with you, Martine, and come down the row, and kind of what do you want to add to shaping the future of AI?
Goodness, that's a big, heavy question. I'm an optimist by nature. I read a lot of science fiction, so what can go wrong, what can go right is in there. For me, AI should enable individuals and communities, right? It is ultimately not about driving efficiency, it is about supercharging humanity. Now, there is a place to go from where we are to that vision, and that is very disruptive for individuals, entire communities, entire professions, et cetera, right? But I do think, and I hope that this is where it's going, and this is the way I think about it. I will say, X, as you were talking, one of our senior advisors said this quote on a panel we held internally, and I love it, right? In corporate boards, whenever corporate boards are talking about AI, it's the illiterate talking to the uneducated. And I've sit on an AI panel. I'm both illiterate and uneducated at this level, right? But this is part of what I do think on a day-to-day basis we have to do, even at an individual level, trying things out and trying to eliminate the illiteracy and uneducatedness around AI.
Thank you. X.
I have 10 nieces and nephews, and the two youngest are twin boys. They're twin Geminis. They're crazy. And when I wake up every day, I think about the world that I'm going to leave them. That when they're my age and I have to answer their questions about why the world is the way that it is, that I don't have to hang my head in shame. I want to leave a world that's better for them, one that is empowered for them, not one that has automated the things that my ancestors and my grandparents fought against. And my contribution to that is what we're doing at UC Berkeley, where we're creating an AI policy lab specifically to help solve some of these problems, have a living resource for people who are designing AI products and policymakers to be able to continuously update themselves as the technology changes and to bridge that gap. Now, I could go work at another big company and take the golden leash, get some good stock, but I feel like I want all of us to think about it from that perspective, not just how it can help us in our immediate quarter goals or our immediate annual goals, but what is the legacy that we're leaving? There's a quote that says, you can't be mad at the world because, you can't be mad at the way the world is because you didn't make it that way, but it's your fault if it stays that way.
Awesome. Sachin.
So I think, for me, the shared future starts with this concept of we must fall forward, not fall back. Because we only have eyes at the front of our head. So at least when we fall forward, we know where we're landing. And sort of building on the fall forward, for me, it's how do we empower people of all ages, from all backgrounds, to unlock their human potential? And unlocking a human potential is all sorts of things. It could be someone who's interested in music, but doesn't know how to read music, can now be a musician. It could be someone who loves art, but doesn't know how to paint, can now paint. It could be someone who wants to be a screenwriter, but hasn't gone through screenwriting school, hasn't done the internships, but can now actually have that critical imagination and be able to write scripts. And our small part in this is ultimately, whether it is AI or not, it's always going to sit on a bed of software. It is a fraction of software. And so to the extent you can allow people to create software to unlock their own potential, is how you will ultimately shape a shared future.
Les, what do you want to put on the table of the shared future?
We talk a lot about the American dream at Milken conferences, and not everyone is born equal, whether that's economic circumstances, whether that's physical, medical circumstances. And I think AI used appropriately is the right type of tool, can hopefully even the playing field and create a democratization in the use where people that are disadvantaged can now compete, can now have advantages. That's where I see.
Awesome. Seth.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's, what we're seeing real time is that it's an incredible enabler of talent. I'm personally very optimistic and excited about what we're going to see, across all sorts of different industries. For us, given we spend so much time in cyber, I'm proud of the work that our companies do, really protecting critical industry, government, both here and around the world. And to the question on adversaries previously, there's just some incredibly smart people now working with this next generation of machine learning and AI that are incorporating this technology into really important infrastructure that we're all using on a daily basis. And most times, we don't even realize we're interacting with it. So we're very proud of that, but I just think there's a lot of reason to be generally optimistic about where we go from here.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up. I hope that everyone was educated, inspired, just excited about what's next and about these minds who are here that are shaping the future. Can you join me in thanking them for this conversation? Thank you so much.